Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hey folks, I'm Andy Stricker, and I am the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Connecticut College here in New London, Connecticut. I've also worked in athletics and admissions positions at Kalamazoo College, Beloit College, Ursinus College, and Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Andy Stricker continues part 5 of 7 of our deep dive on athletics and college admissions. You heard Kevin Newton do a 4-parter on universities in London. Well, he's doing it first. He's taken a question from a listener. Dale from Virginia has a question about international schools and the IB program, and Kevin will answer that for us. And we have a brand new interview. I've never done a 2-hour deep dive on a school spotlight, a college spotlight, but that's what I did with David Graves, and we'll run it about 25 minutes a week over the next 5 weeks, doing a deep dive on UGA. And our college spotlight is our interview.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Friends, I've never done a 7-part interview before like I'm doing with Andy Stricker, so I decided to kind of go back a bit for parts 5 through 7 and play a couple minutes of the previous episode for you to get some context. So if you're here the first part and you think, this sounds eerily familiar, I think I've already heard this episode. Just know that we do play about 2 minutes from last week's episode, and then the rest is fresh content. But in part 5 of 7, Andy starts out talking about the reasons admission officers pull an offer after a student has gone through the admission process. We do a deep dive on this, and stay here for the whole segment. Listen and enjoy. I'm talking about situations where somebody makes it through the pre-read, it's thumbs up, and now the coach is communicating with the player that, hey, we got the thumbs up from admissions. And you very well that the player is interpreting that as, hey, I'm coming to your school.
Right.
So how, in your mind, you're like, well, you may be coming, you may not, because I got a couple people ranked above you on the board, and there's not room for all of the people.
Right.
So how are they supposed to communicate at that point? Because that's the point where their interaction with other schools is also impacted. I mean, I had a student I worked with last year, had a bunch of NESCAC schools interested in them. And they're a NESCAC athlete right now at one of the more competitive programs. I'm not going to say sport or gender or anything. And they were pretty savvy about this. We are talking about this stuff all the time. That, it went up on the player side, up on that, crossed right up on the ethical line, because they probably had several schools thinking they were probably coming. But they were doing this partly out of insurance. Like, I don't want to be left at the altar.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? So, like, that's the ramification on the player side. But so I'm talking about, like, at the time the pre-read's communicated, because if you're getting massive enthusiasm,
right,
people are not naive to not know, okay, whether you explicitly tell the student or they just do it on their own, they now, and assuming there was some vetting out of where are we on your list, which about that's always being done, right? There's a lot of that, where are we on your list stuff. So they then a coach isn't naive to know that a player's not going to go and shut down their other options thinking that I've found my home. So what's the sort of ethical requirement for the coach to not have the player go burn the rest of their bridges if they're not working with a savvy family? I had a savvy family, and this isn't my first rodeo, so we were able to work through it. But a lot of other people would just go tell the others, hey, hey, I loved working with you, but I found my home now.
Right. I think there are two things. First, I would hope that coaches are working as expeditiously as possible.
Right. Quick
So
turnaround time.
you don't want this dragging on and on and on and on. And second, I would say, if asked, be transparent. We've made an offer to a different goalie. We're uncertain if that goalie is going to say yes. We're still interested in you. If that goalie says yes, then yeah, it's in your best interest to move on.
This is where I think ED actually can help to the student too, because when the coach is pushing for ED, of course, stuff can still fall through between the summer and November.
Right.
But pushing hard for ED and then lots of communication too. The players that I've worked with, there's been a lot of communication going on when they really wanted you.
Yeah,
and they
absolutely.
fell off and it started falling off when they weren't as interested.
This is kind of like the social dynamics that exist within the pursuit of partnership in our society. If people text you back within like 2 or 3 minutes, then yeah, they're interested. And if it's 3 days before they text you back, then
Right.
read between the lines.
Yeah, I hear you.
I guess, it's just, but yeah, again, if pressed, if asked, I would hope, and I've stressed to our coaches that, yeah, we want greater levels of transparency. I want our students and our families to know where they stand.
The fact that, you're saying, Andy, like there's a debate. Is it athletics job? Is it admissions job? I don't really know what's going on out there. That implies that it's the Wild West is what it seems like. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. And I've worked with coaches that have had incredibly high levels of ethical standards. And I've worked with coaches that have the lowest level of ethical standards, who promise the world. And I've worked at schools that employed coaches. So I've worked with coaches. They were one of our coaches who had incredibly low ethical standards and would say anything to secure the commitment of a student athlete. And that gets really problematic because we're promising things that the institution or the program can't deliver. And that's, that's a real problem.
Let's go to the other way you've seen it, because I really like how you broke it down, right? You've seen it happen where the coach backs out, and you've also seen it happen where the kid doesn't get through the admissions committee.
Correct.
After passing the pre-read. So talk to us about the admissions one when it breaks down there. I mean, a couple obvious ones are major discipline that occurs.
Yep.
And I've seen that happen on my end with a student and the other one I've seen is a student that's, that the grades come in and they've tanked.
Yeah.
I saw Yale pull an offer for a kid it was a straight A kid for 4 years and had 2 C's, know? I mean, this was a kid who was number 1 in the country in their sport.
Yeah.
They still ended up at another Ivy, interesting, but that was because of their high level talent. But anyway.
I worked with a young lady years ago who was an Ivy League lacrosse commit from early in high school. And this is just one of these really sad, tragic stories. In her senior year, came out to her family and her parents that she was gay. And it caused all kinds of family turmoil, because her family was not overly accepting of it, which caused real academic challenges in terms of academic performance. The offer was yanked. And this student's life was basically thrown into a significant level of turmoil.
Sure.
And bounced around from spot to spot to spot to spot. And it was really, and it's a wonderful young lady who really impressed me. And it's just a really sad story how some of this stuff occurs over the course of, the best laid plans of mice and men, I guess is what I'd say.
Those are a couple of reasons, right? Like you tank academically, you tank character-wise, but those are things that can happen to non-athletes as well.
Yeah.
ED1, and then you get
100%.
Final transcript.
Yep.
I mean, that's a bigger school, but when I interviewed Lisa Prescott at UCSB, Santa Barbara, they rescind about 20 kids a year because the final transcript comes back and it's like, whoa. Of course, the UCs aren't getting 12th grade grades at all.
Right.
So that happens a lot outside of that happens to non-athletes, right?
Right.
I'm sure another thing could be, I haven't had this, but I know it happens, and I've talked to admission officers that have experienced this. Someone just did a shoddy job on the application. Like, they just
Mailed it in.
mailed it in. It said, I'm in.
Yep.
So I'm sure you've seen that in your career.
100%.
Am I correct? Yeah.
100%.
What else am I missing besides the grade drop, the discipline? I guess there could be a wreck, but that sort of could fall into really bad character, as opposed to discipline. If you got really bad wrecks, no, that doesn't happen that often because you can pick your rec writers, and most people are smart enough to pick someone favorable. But
yep.
What are the other reasons why you've seen it happen on the admission side? And if you were to break down what are the reasons it happens most often, those are the three that come to mind for me, right? Discipline, grades, and mailing in the application. Anything else I'm missing?
Well, one of the ones that immediately pops to mind is coach found a better prospect.
That's true. I was still thinking that. I was thinking that in the context of the first one, but that's not the first one because you're talking about you're differentiating them based on timing, right? Yeah.
Coach may have found a better prospect.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the other things is that a coach may not have understood how much juice they have with the admission office.
Yeah, I had that happen year before
where a coach
last.
thought they had X amount of juice and they actually had X minus one spot, and they had to change things. It could also happen when an institution sees some kind of change in their early decision one pool, larger, stronger, and as a result, they have to make tough decisions about how they're going to allocate their selected number of admits in ED1.
Talk to us about these. Like, I've seen coaches communicate, look, I normally get 5 spots. I'm only getting 3, budget stuff. I've seen that kind of stuff, but I've always experienced it sort of at the pre-read level as to the feedback.
Right.
You're talking about going all the way through, encouraged, and then it happens. Talk about some of these ones because I think our listeners would be interested in. I mean, you've been at 5 institutions. You got a lot of experience.
Right. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that we have a particular applicant pool that profiles early decision one applicant pool that profiles fairly similarly on an annual basis. And we're going to generate somewhere in the range of 200 to 210 admits in ED1. And about 50% of them are going to be athletes. Okay. But all of a sudden, one year, people decide that the camel is the coolest animal out there. And
that's their mascot for those who don't know, listeners.
Yeah,
that's the CC mascot.
It's the con camels, And New London is really the garden spot of all places to live for 4 years,
Boston.
Which I'm not stretching it too far. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at an applicant pool that could easily generate 250 to 260 great admits.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily want to go above maybe 210 to 215 to maybe 220 because I still have ED2 and I still have regular decision yet to come. And I don't necessarily want to start enrolling 75, 80% of my class via one admission program. What that could do is then squeeze or put pressure on the part of the applicant pool where athletics is a factor in the conversation. And therefore, instead of allocating, in the range of or having about 100 admits of our 200 be recruited student athletes, what if the pool is really strong and really deep? And I'm like, the last 5 to 10 of these kids just don't match up with these other 150 non-athletes that are really great and really strong. And then I got to balance this. Okay, what are we trying to do with ED1? How are we trying to preserve space for ED2 and regular decision? How do we be fair and equitable as we evaluate these individual students and balance this group of admits? And there are plenty of circumstances where you could say this recruited student athlete just doesn't match up to the characteristics, personal characteristics or academic characteristics of these other 40 students. And I just can't justify making this offer of admission when I can't make the same offer, or I can't offer admission to these other 40 kids. So there are times where an applicant pool could evolve, and what you thought was going to be an admit in July may not be an admit because of the pressures that exist within an applicant pool. That could easily happen.
I totally appreciate how you sort of unpack that. Everything makes perfect sense to me, and
Yeah.
it's painful, when you hear that.
And we're trying to be fair and equitable across a group of students that if it changes significantly from one year to the next, the bar for fair and equitable probably goes up, and it needs to go up across all constituents within that, sort of sub application group, whether
Of course,
it's
the argument
theater.
against that to me, Andy, would be, well, these other EDs didn't go through a process where you told them thumbs up, right? Like that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's the other argument there. Like,
Yep.
and I can understand that side very strongly.
Oh, totally. I totally get it.
Do you find that this is where feeder schools have advantages? Like, okay, we don't want to burn this kid from this school that sends a whole bunch of things because word's going to spread and it could impact us down the road. Do you find that comes into the conversation? Because that's how it would have happened where I worked. Like it might have been a difference between a key feeder or anytime you thought like this could create an earthquake and reverberate and have ramifications that might adversely impact us.
I think it's very easy to get to that point. I tend to be the type of person who thinks relationships matter.
Yeah.
And relationships with individuals, relationships with communities, relationships with schools. I think there are plenty of institutions where they would sit in a room or it's easy to acknowledge that, yeah, that may matter in that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
And ideally what I would want to do is, okay, all right, let's, we're at 215 admits. We want to keep it at 215 admits, but here's a student from one of our really strong feeder schools with a great community, a great relationship. They're the 216th student. What I'd be like is, let's just add one so we can do both.
Mm-hmm.
We can value this ED applicant who doesn't come from, a feeder school or a feeder community for us. And let's just bump it one to bring this other student in. That's how I'd like to approach it. But when the volume of that gets significantly higher, I think there's a human element that has to come into that, or it's
Sure.
easy to acknowledge that could play a role.
Friends, this concludes part 5 of Admission at Connecticut College, helping us understand athletic recruiting. Hope you'll join us next week for part 6 of 7.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, you're in for a treat. A couple months ago, I sussed out the fact that we were going to have Kevin Newton come on to do some questions from a listener. So send in your international questions. And so we've had 2 great questions that have come in. I'll play the question now, and Kevin, take it away.
Hi, Mark. This is Dale. I heard you say that you were going to be doing a program on study overseas for American students, and you wanted some questions. And I have a lot of questions on this, and I have a child who's interested potentially in studying overseas. But I have 2 that I would hope that your guests would be able to address. The first has to do with the value of the IB diploma when you're an American applying to a foreign university. And are there particular countries and or programs or both where having the IB is either very, very helpful or required if you want to study there?
So the first question, kind of what's the value of the International Baccalaureate diploma when going overseas? And it's really I hate to, it might just be that, as a lot of people know, my wife just finished up law school. So everything now becomes a lawyerly answer of it depends.
Uh-oh.
But
You're now dangerous.
it,
I
it
like the
really,
straight shooting Kev.
it really does depend on the student. So, just for some familiarity for those who don't have it, an IB diploma was created many years ago to combine the best aspects of different European approaches. So the French baccalaureate, where you study a lot of different subjects, but as well as studying 2 or 3 subjects in depth, like the British A levels. So you take typically 6 academic subjects, 3 at standard level, which depending on the high school may or may not be, somewhere between an honors and an AP class, and then 3, sometimes 4 at higher level, which are supposed to be at the same difficulty, if not more strenuous than a typical AP class. So you have to take subjects across a number of different areas, which is the first kind of thing to point out, is that if you've got a student who is spiky in his or their academic interest, if they know that this is what they want to do. I'm working with a student right now who has absolutely perfect grades in all things STEM. You put a history book in front of him and he does well, but he's getting B's. So it's, for a student like that, the IB approach may not be the best because the scores on the standard level, a standard level history class would impact in. The short answer, and I think the answer that, the too lazy didn't listen answer, is if you've got access to APs, especially if you can hit between 3 and 5 APs, 5 being for the most competitive schools like Cambridge or LSE, but 3 APs in relevant subjects, you're doing just as good. Now, if you've got a student who's psyched up about taking the IB and, wants to look at that and, really wants to delve into different subjects, then yeah, absolutely take the IB. If your school has a good track record of helping students score well with it, it can really help you stand out. But for a lot of students who maybe they know what their interests are, or their school just doesn't put a huge emphasis on the difference between a 6 or a 7 at higher level, which are the two of the higher scores you can get, it might make more sense just to stick with the APs.
So there's no preference for IB really at any of the international schools?
I think if you're coming in with APs and, as much as I hate to say it, a good ACT or SAT score,
sure,
that would be the one thing that I think kind of stands out, is if for some odd reason you feel you can do better on the IB, because it's not just one test. Other aspects of the curriculum do factor in. If you feel you can do better on the IB than a combination of high stakes testing, be it the AP or the ACT or SAT, then it does kind of shift that calculation a little bit.
And do you see a difference with the full diploma, versus, taking almost an AP approach, piecemeal, pick and choose your IB courses?
That's a great distinction to make. Everything I just said is for the full diploma. When it comes to doing the individual IB courses or the certificates, it is not to a student's advantage. If you're going to do either IB certificates or APs, do the APs. They're much more universally accepted. It's something that, every year I've got a student who pops up and says, I want to get out of my IB program. What do I do? Can I just take the certificates? And there are a handful of places that will consider them, but for whatever reason, the AP is held at a much higher standard than individual certificates. It doesn't quite make sense to me, to be quite honest with you.
That's a little
but
strange in some ways. Yeah. Well, I mean, we get the diploma being held in higher regard. It's just a little surprising that individual IB courses wouldn't be seen almost as similar to individual AP courses. That's the part that doesn't make as much sense. We get the value of the diploma, the comprehensive nature of everything you've been exposed to. In some ways, it's almost like a core curriculum for high school. Right. We know you've got this rock solid foundation, covers the social sciences, covers humanities, covers natural sciences, and covers your maths and, of course, your English. And then you throw in theory of knowledge and a social action project and art and with a lot of heavy writing, heavy researching, a lot of critical thinking. I get that. A question for you. So this is one thing that's tricky for me to articulate, but I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to say how I see the IB scene over here. And I want you to see if you would say it's different over there. But I'm doing probably something that I should never do, that I always correct my students' families do. There's no over there because every school is different. So,
Right.
But I'll throw it out there and let's see what you say. So, this question comes up a lot for me in individual counseling, right? IB versus AP. And mostly what people are really saying is, when they ask that question, they're really saying to me, they're not asking me like which one may be better suited for my child, which one might they enjoy more. They're just completely looking at the pragmatic side of which one helps me get in. That's the angle, right? Which human nature, you're trying to get in, you're talking to somebody about getting in, I get it. So what I find with AP versus IB, now I'm talking at the most selective schools. Both of that, colleges are really true, really, really believe what they say. Then we're going to judge you in the context for which you come, right? And because AP is the dominant test, of course, they like them both and they know them well and they feel like they can deduce things from looking at certain grades in the context of those courses. And then you throw in scores on top of it and they feel they have a sense of content mastery in what that curriculum is. And they respect it a lot more than a regular curriculum or even advanced or honors or dual enrollment in many cases, which has such a wide range. So there's that mindset. And so, but I find like when I talk to admission officers at the most elite schools, they get excited and they get jazzed when someone has done the IB curriculum. The IB diploma. They do like the research piece. They do like the writing piece. They do like the foundational knowledge across disciplines. And some of them will even say there's this curiosity and love of learning that they just see in those kids. So that can be true, while simultaneously also, I'm not going to disadvantage somebody who didn't take a curriculum that's still a very small percentage of the 25,000 plus schools in this country still offer. It's growing fast. And I should have looked this up. I didn't know we were going to go there in the conversation, but I still saw the number of high schools that offer IB, and it's still relatively small as a percentage. So two things can be true at the same time. I can get excited when I see someone's done an IB diploma because I kind of know what that means in terms of their level of rigor, and I like that exposure, while at the same time not disadvantaging somebody who does an AP curriculum and knowing that I'm not faulting you because that's what your school offered and there's plenty of rigor there. And most of our kids do AP that come in here and do well.
Right.
So it'd be crazy to do that. It would almost be like if this is actually a good analogy. I'm at a school that 90% of kids who submit scores submit SATs and 10% submit ACTs. And let's say personally, I just like the ACT. Well, I'm not going to, disadvantage the 90%, but that's mostly what we see. And we have a track record of being able to admit kids who come in here and do really, really, really well. So, so both things can kind of be true at the same time, if that makes sense. But I do find if you were to give most admission officers truth serum, I got to be really careful how I say this because if I say AP or IB, which one do you prefer? I think the answer is going to be whichever one your school offers is going to be the answer. But if I was to say, hey, is there one that you think ends up, I don't want to say making somebody more college ready, but one that maybe I'm saying that. I don't need to be very careful not to say that. Is there one that maybe impresses you the most? A piecemeal approach to IB or a comprehensive approach to IB diploma across the board? I think it's IB diploma. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you're disadvantaged by not doing IB diplomas. So I don't know. I don't even know if that came out right, because as soon as I say that colleges are impressed by IB diplomas from a rigor standpoint, right? That doesn't mean we're not looking at personal qualities, we're not looking at extracurricular impact, we're not looking at institutional priorities and our needs. That can be heard by somebody as, oh my goodness, maybe I need to look at getting my kid in an IB school. And that is not what I'm saying. I don't know. Right. What I'm asking you is, would you say that's a different mentality, if I even articulated it the way I understand it, than you understand the schools? Do you think that's a different mentality? It sounds like a little, it is a little bit.
Because let's say that, you want to apply for history, or you want to apply for natural sciences. Under the IB curriculum, if you're pursuing the diploma, which again is what you would want to do, you've got, for natural sciences, you can take 2 science electives and a math class. For history, you can take 2 history classes, and sure, you can take an HL in English literature or a foreign language or something else closely related. With the APs, you can stack them up. I've got a student right now who their interest is history, and they've taken AP US History, AP World History, they're taking AP European History now, and AP Human Geography. They have an advanced qualification in the language. The AP curriculum is absolutely wonderful for them. Now, the one thing that I would caution on is where the IB diploma has an advantage over the AP, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is, with the APs, typically you're going to have to offer an ACT or SAT as well. Some places let you use the ACT or SAT as a replacement for an additional AP exam. Like Oxford requires 4 5s unless you have, want to sub in an ACT or SAT score. Then it's 3 5s plus that. If you apply with the IB, they're going to make their decision based off the IB. They're very unlikely to ask. And again, things do get skewed when you get to those highly competitive places. But honestly, if you apply to, say, the University of Edinburgh with the IB diploma, they're not going to ask for an additional AP course. They're going to treat you within that silo of this is what your high school did. I certainly have students who, especially in STEM, do the IB diploma, but they might pick up an AP calculus class or an AP physics class along the way because that's how their high schools are structured. They can do that, and that's great, but it's not an expectation. Whereas with the AP, there is that, we're Oxford, we might accept you for PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. But, you say you're taking that, AP microecon second semester senior year, we're going to want to see a 5 in that.
Kev, I had an epiphany when you were talking. I can see why there would be this respect for the AP and international, because of how much they're looking for a clear indication that you want to study what you want to study, right? And that's valued so highly in their process. And you can make the case by, like, saying, hey, I'm going to take, 4 different classes, in an AP, and you can become more of a specialist. And that sort of suits that model of convince me you want to study what you want to study and go deep in it. I had an interesting conversation with a student working the other day. He says, help me know which AP scores to list, on my Common App. And I'm like, well, you got 15 spots. He's like, well, I've had 17. I mean, counting what he's going to have senior year.
That is, it's, again, I don't mean to slide this in, Mark, but I'm going to slide this in. It's something that overseas, we look at the absolute most rigorous place when it comes to requesting APs. Cambridge wants 5 scores of 5. Yeah. And that's to meet their minimum. Sometimes it is helpful to have 6 or 7 if you're going to someplace like Cambridge, if they're relevant. But, I've got a student right now who I think is she's about to be a senior. She's well into double digits on APs, on her 5s. And it's honestly like, again, there's no crystal ball. There's nothing like that, but it's just, you're good. It means that your personal statement, your interview, the other things matter so much more, but you're good.
Friends, Dale has a second question, and Kevin will be back to answer that question next week on episode 467. See you then.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, this is one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. In our, I can't remember what year we're in, year 7 for your college-bound kid, especially in terms of college spotlights. We really go deep. And I think if you're interested in University of Georgia, you're going to really leave with a much greater understanding of UGA than before you started. So in part 1, David gives his background and his bio, and the multiple roles he has had in his 27 years at UGA. Then David shares how UGA has changed since he arrived in the 90s. David shares what his elevator pitch is when someone says, "Tell me more about UGA." David and I both have daughters who graduated from UGA, so we discuss this. David explains what he means when he says, "We allow students to shift." David explains whether a student's college major impacts admissions decisions. David answers the question, does a student need to apply to get into their major, or are they just admitted to whatever major they want to enroll in? David explains why Southern flagship schools have gotten so popular. And David explains why UGA doesn't have seasonal reps that present all over the country like Alabama, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I am very excited. I'm with someone I've wanted to interview for years. I'm with Dr. David Graves, the Director of Admission at the University of Georgia. Hi, David.
Hello. How are you doing, Mark?
Thank you. I'll try not to be biased, but my youngest daughter is a UGA grad who's very proud. So we're happy to have you here today.
Well, I've got the same way that my daughter is a UGA grad. So she is out in Arizona right now, but yeah, she got her bachelor's and master's at UGA. So
Nice.
It's an exciting place to be.
Nice. Let's start with your backstory. I always find it helpful for people to know a little bit about, the context from which you'll speak.
Sure. And I'm actually not a doctor, but my name is David Russell Graves. So
Sure.
Dr. Graves, that was the email that was given to me. And suddenly when I started my blog and did other things, it was Dr. Graves, and everybody just assumed I'm a doctor. So it's
Including
always
me.
funny. But no, I'm not. I've got a master's, but I grew up in Connecticut, but
Uh-huh.
my family's always from the South. And so, in fact, my family originally is from the Atlanta, Georgia area. And so most of my siblings went south for college. I went to Clemson University, so that's going to make an awkward this weekend as far as Clemson versus Georgia football game. But yeah, I went to Clemson. I wasn't sure what I wanted to be as far as degrees or, passion for a career. And I just fell in love with college. So that was key. I stayed there with bachelor's, master's. I connected as far as with my wife. She was a nurse, and so she went to Atlanta, and I just tagged along. And I volunteered at Oglethorpe University for about 6 months, just volunteered in financial aid and admissions just to get my foot in the door and say, hey, I'd love to be here. 7 years later, after 7 years at Oglethorpe, I shifted to UGA, and I've now been here. This is coming up on year 27. I'm going to be starting in about a month and a half. So,
Wow.
and I love the college environment. So that's really why I wanted to be in admissions or in something involving higher education.
And you've had quite a few internal promotions, I think, within UGA, right? What role did you start at compared to where you are now?
I think I started, one step above counselor, but for 7 years, I was traveling. I went everywhere. I went to Texas, Louisiana, St. Louis, all that. And then I went to here at UGA, that second level up. I've then just risen for the last, like I said, 26 years as far as in admissions here. I've been the interim director twice and started the official director job about a year and a half ago. So,
I imagine it's great having been in Oglethorpe as long as you were in terms of like really having a sense of small school, big school and how they're different. It's those are two extremes.
Those are drastic extremes. It's hilarious when thinking back where it was, we needed a 300 person class as far as at Oglethorpe University
Right.
for the freshman class.
Sure.
You didn't get 300. If you had 280, financially it was going to be a challenge.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
shifting here where 300 is a small orientation here at UGA because we've got over 6,000 freshmen starting. So, but it gives you a sense of scope, a sense of, both are great places. They're just different.
Sure.
And, that gives me also a sense of the idea of, I can't tell you a student where to go to school. They've got to figure it out for themselves and feel what's right for them. And it used to be, when I was much younger, it was, oh, I've got to sell the college. Now it's more of, here's what we are. If you like us, that's great. If you don't, there's a lot of other places, and find your spot.
So just curious, how many applicants was UGA getting 27 years ago compared to now?
I can't even think I know that probably it was about 10,000 versus back when I first started versus right now 43,000. I'm guessing 45,000 or so maybe this year. We don't really push hard for, we've got to get more and more and more. It's more of, we want to get the students who really are wanting to match here and feel it's a good place. We jumped as far as applications when we went to the Common App, about 4 years ago. That's been the big jump, and it was mostly out of state. But we all started growing a little bit in state. I mean, Georgia is a growing state.
Sure.
We're not going to quite have that dip that a lot of other institutions or a lot of other states will see as far as the high school graduation numbers. So I envision that we will continue to grow a little bit each year, both in state and out of state. Maybe a little bit more out of state this year. We'll see.
Sounds great. Awesome. So let's say you were all the way across the other part of the country. California's on my mind because I'm heading there for 24 days and I'll be there for the NACAC conference. And you take in an Uber and you get to chatting and you tell them what you do and they say, University of Georgia. Tell me about the University of Georgia. What's the elevator pitch?
All right. Well, one, I try and never say what my job is when I'm out because then I get those questions. But, those are sometimes tough, especially in the grocery store. But if I did, I would say, first of all, we are a large institution. We're not the largest. We're not Arizona State.
Sure.
It's looking to grow, but we are a large institution, 40,000 plus. Broad spectrum as far as what we offer. We've grown a great deal as far as our academic offerings. We're adding a med school in 2026, which won't really impact undergraduates, but as a whole, the feeling we're able to offer everything, and we allow students to shift. But we're also within a smaller, either a large college town or a small college city, so you don't quite have that feeling of, a bad day of work as far as if I had, a bad traffic day, it goes from 20 minutes to 25 minutes versus when I was in Atlanta, it could be from 35 minutes to 2 hours. So we have that college vibe feel. There's a great town-gown relationship in Athens because Athens is a funky little place. It's a cool little city. But it's one also where the students, we challenge them, but not to the point where they are just exhausted, because we want to make sure that they, one, academically succeed and do well and find their place, but also that they still enjoy life. And so you will see that. Again, I have the experience of two kids, one going to a, more of a, the tech, a high pressure sort of tech environment versus here. It's just a good environment to both learn, grow, and enjoy life.
And I tell people that as well, watching my daughter's experience. Like, there's a tremendous balance between high academics and you're surrounded by highly motivated, focused students who aren't there just to party, but handle their business, but yet still have fun and enjoy, an active social life. Now, you mentioned that you allow people to shift. Unpack that. What does that mean? Talk about that.
I think it comes down to the focus of the institution. As far as there are some institutions, and hey, this is not good or bad. It's just some institutions will say you're going to come in as this major, whatever you apply to and get admitted as, you're staying in that for all 4 years. or roughly all that, or it's really tough to change between, let's say, agriculture to engineering or business. For us, we allow students to change. We want them to be here and find, if we've got the program, go into it. And we allow them to shift. It's always a question every year that parents will ask. I've answered it many times as far as to students and parents. Generally, they don't always believe me. But it's one where we say, we want, again, you to find the place that fits you best within the university. Now, there are some colleges within UGA that do have what are called high demand majors. So you would, let's say business, you come in as pre-business or intended business, and then after a year and a half, you apply to that specific major. They're looking at how you've done, let's say, in accounting 1 and 2, a few other classes, and making sure that it's a good match, that you're going to still succeed in there. But a lot of the admit rates for those high demand majors are very high, but they just want to make sure that the student is ready. So that's where if you come in and you're poultry science and you want to suddenly be in engineering, it's allowed. If you want to do the reverse, it's allowed. That does add some challenges if you've been in a major for a while and then shift as far as will that add to your degree time. But again, before a student even hits orientation, they can go in and change their major because we want them to come in and say, here's what I really want to do. We know that 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds will change their minds. I changed my mind, and it's okay to do that, to suddenly narrow your scope or shift your scope a little bit. And we've set it up so that's fine. And if suddenly you have a little bit more, as far as more students going into engineering, they will shift some resources to say, let's bolster the academic, the faculty numbers, all of that, to make sure that it's still a successful program.
I think the reason why people are surprised is because it's so rare at the university level. That's very liberal arts and science approach to education. You really just don't see that a lot. So I know you've often said, and I've heard you say it, and for those of you who don't know, Dave's got a fantastic admissions blog that I highly recommend anybody interested in UGA check out. But I've often heard you say that major doesn't factor into your admissions decision. Are there some exceptions to that?
There are no exceptions. Well, and I have to sort of couch this a little bit, and that
Sure.
There are no real exceptions as far as that. But what we do is when a student applies, whatever major they put in, we're looking to say, how have you prepared yourself for that major?
Sure.
And so it impacts it, but not in it's harder to get into X or Y, or you're applying for this major. We can only admit X number of students into business, like 500, 800, whatever it might be. But if you say, I'm going into, again, ag engineering or agricultural communications, we're looking to see, well, what have you already done? Have you been involved in 4-H? Have you been involved in something like that? Or if it's business, have you been involved in the stock market club? Or, are you taking an internship with a company? We're saying whatever that is you choose, how have you prepared yourself? And that's both activity-wise, but also if you're an engineer, how are you taking AP Calc? Are you taking physics, or the highest level of physics you can, to prepare yourself? But it hits every single major. We're saying, how have you done that? And it's especially important with some majors, like, let's say, education, where there's no AP education class. So we're saying, hey, have you volunteered at your local school system? Are you trying to assist in certain things and do certain steps to get ready for that and prepare yourself and know what it is? Again, we don't divide it and say, only we're reading for this now. No, but major will have an impact as far as just all majors and where you're going as far as getting ready for it.
No, I think that's an important distinction. So I often talk about fit to major, and you used multiple examples. If you tell me you're interested in X, then I will read the application through that prism to see how well your qualifications and interests align with that. So I'm glad you didn't only use examples like AP Calc and physics, but also, where have you plugged in and where have you been involved? So that's part of how an applicant is evaluated. But what about like knowledge within the institution that, wow, we don't really have that many people here or that many faculty here? Is that something in the back of your mind, or are you looking at it more from a standpoint of, you know what, people change their mind more than half the time, so what they say now is not necessarily where they're going to land?
I mean, we know that, again, we know that that's going to happen, that students are going to change their minds. So I'm not suddenly saying, oh, we need more X majors. So let me vision that way. Not the current provost, but probably he feels the same way. But a couple of provosts ago, I was talking with them, talking about this idea, and if they still want to do it. And they said, well, if this major suddenly starts not having enough students, we either work with them to recruit better on their side, or it could be that major no longer exists in a couple of years. But they wanted to say, we're going to work with the students who are here, and who what they want is what we'll try and provide the best that we can. And so I'm not in the back of my mind saying, oh, well, we need more of X. Let's give a nudge to this student. And we're a large, again, going back to Oglethorpe versus UGA.
Sure.
The funny part is we are large enough that we don't talk about, one student versus another student. There's too many applicants and too many enrolling students to do that. My dad used to joke, he was a 40-year accountant for General Electric. Back in the 80s, 90s, General Electric was huge. And he used to say that when they were dealing with money, they would round up in the millions. It wasn't, here's 1,000. They just said, we got to deal with the scope. Same with us, in that we're going to say, if you're the same, these are identical students, we're going to have the identical decision joint for those same students. And if we're admitting, we're looking more of here's another 100 or 200 that we're working with. Not, we need one more applicant and one more admit. Or if one student goes off the wait list, we add one more. We're not dealing with those ones like that. We're dealing let's look at a larger group, because we're dealing with 6,200 that are going to enroll as far as freshmen. So.
And are students applying sophomore year typically to get into a major? Are there certain majors that you have to apply to get into, like a business, and others that you just declare? How does that work?
Yeah. So a majority of our majors, you just apply at the front when you're a high school senior. You just go into that major. My daughter was in, political science initially. She just went into that major. And a majority of them, and especially in the humanities, are like that. But occasionally you're going to see a college or some majors that are a little bit tighter. So business, education, and journalism. Those are the big ones where I'd say, yeah, those are a little bit tighter. And they'll apply generally in their sophomore year. Usually it's either after the freshman year, after the first semester of sophomore year. During that fall sophomore term, they'll apply it then, and they'll hear about December before they need to even get into many of the major classes. They'll already know, I'm now in accounting, or I'm now in, this media program. So really they will know by a year and a half, unless they're late, they change majors late, or unless, we had to have it where transfers. I do suggest, and hopefully they know their interest a little bit earlier and focus on it, because we have a lot of transfer students and we don't want them to be delayed in a graduation, but that causes some challenges that they just have to know a little bit earlier and move a little bit faster.
Let's talk about Southern flagships, which have gotten really, really popular. I did an interview with Andy Borst on this topic. By the way, shout out to you. He said he had long admired you for a long time, and knowing he'd be working with you was one of the reasons he took the UGA position. So that's pretty high praise there, David.
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to ask you that question. Why do you think Southern flagships have gotten so popular? Especially on the southeast along the coastal border, right? So I would say certainly, UVA and UNC have been really popular for a long time, but lately we're just seeing a huge surge with South Carolina, Tennessee, certainly Georgia, Florida. Any thoughts on that? Alabama, I'd include.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple. Ole Miss, you could probably throw in there they have a lot of California students. We have an SEC admissions and enrollment management meeting every year that's in May. We're on different campuses and we talk about a lot of things, including this. And one I think that is, it's a good example. When I went to school in Connecticut, high school in Connecticut, it was cold in the winter, and I had to drive through that. I wanted the sun during most of the year.
Yeah.
I also know that financially, if you go to UConn, if you go to SUNY school, etc., it's going to be a big cost, even if you're an in-state. And so some of the southern schools, you see a match as far as close to what the in-state rate is going to be as far as out-of-state, especially, if you're at South Carolina or Alabama, they give a lot of out-of-state waivers or funds to get those numbers. I think that you're also going to see that, again, this Saturday, I'm going to be at the Georgia Clemson game.
Sure.
And big college football, big athletics. It's I don't want to say, it's important or not important, but it gives the institution a certain togetherness, a certain feel as far as community and its excitement. And so you're adding all those together. I think with COVID, you saw that probably some southern schools opened up as far in person a little bit earlier, and students wanted that as well, that connection. I think all those wrapped together are really have made that push a little bit more. I know that Tennessee, they grew a lot over the last couple of years as far as their out-of-state numbers. They even went so far as they had to say, hey, let's try and rein that in a little bit because they were getting so popular out of state. And usually it's going to be also some states where it's either the Northeast is a good example, or some states where there are some challenges getting into their in-state institutions that are similar. So California, you got a little bit of a crunch as far as numbers of applicants versus enrollees. You got Texas, you got some limitations on A&M and UT. Yeah. There's where you're seeing some of that where you've seen the southeastern schools grow a little bit more as far as in popularity, but also in size, as far as the number of freshmen they enroll, to take advantage of that situation. I don't know if it'll last forever, but right now it's still booming as far as the number of students coming in. I just saw USC's numbers, and they're up again as far as their freshman class. So, yeah.
Now, a lot of those states you mentioned, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, immediately come to mind. They have some of the largest seasonal admission staffs in the country. You're just as likely to find a rep living in your area in California or Chicago or Houston or Dallas and work in that market. I know Alabama got up to the mid-40s, and in Tennessee, they all have a lot of seasonals. That is not something that UGA has done. Talk to me about why you think they've done it and you haven't chosen to do that.
Yeah, everybody in the SEC was sort of stunned by how Alabama did it. And, it has its pluses and minuses. We used to have an individual in DC and Texas and California. And that was as big as we wanted to get, because we wanted to also have a strong base in Athens or in Georgia, because we have multiple people that live in Atlanta, but that's where our biggest market is. And for us, we knew there was some HR challenges at times. We've just been hiring part-time readers, and for some reason there's challenges with California and Oregon as far as their HR system, their payment system, tax system. There's some weird things that go on there. We knew that we didn't need to be everywhere. We could use the older model of saying, all right, we're just going to send somebody to Texas this week. In fact, we've got somebody in Dallas this week, sending people up to New York, New Jersey. We wanted to have a community within our team. We have about a 50-person admissions office team, and we don't always have to have them right here, but we figured that helps to have them in office and travel. We know that we are not going to blanket that, because we're not saying, oh, we're just scattering the wind. We've got to have more applicants. We're not that route. We want to say, let's connect on a traditional way of just meeting them both on campus or in their high schools as far as high school visits. but we're able to do that without adding 40 people to the travel team. And we know our market mostly is going to be Southeast and the East Coast. So we don't need anybody into the Dakotas. We'd love to have more South and North Dakota students, but it just doesn't make sense sometimes if it doesn't produce the results you want.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with David Graves. I hope you'll join us next week for the next section. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'll have some special content for you, but I can't share it yet because I'm debating amongst a couple different options. And then we'll have the final part of Vince's interview with Sarah Lovely, talking all things admissions and the arts. And friends, there's still time to sign up for both our Santa Monica event as well as our event in Redwood City. In fact, if you're listening to this today, this evening, we'll have our event in San Diego. We had a huge rush of signups at the end, so we got a good group coming out, but you can still sign up for Santa Monica on the 22nd, Redwood City on the 19th, by going to yourcollegebounkid.com/events. And friends, when it comes to building a college list or selecting a college, your student should be looking for an academic match. Your student should also be looking for a social match. Your student should be looking for an emotional match. And by that, I mean the environment is healthy. Your student should be looking for a financial match, and you as a parent should be looking for a financial match as well. And finally, they should be looking for a career or vocational match. Because remember, college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegebounkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegebounkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.